remarkable that we're looking at some of these games that we've seen outside of last night and really the second half of that 49ers Seahawks game. These games have all been as advertised. And when you got a common opponent like the Giants and the Eagles, I mean, guys, this is going to make for a pretty damn good football game. And I'll tell you what, man, that Giant team does not look the same. I couldn't believe what they did against Minnesota. All right, all that being said, we're so privileged that Merrill Reese finds time with us all the time, and we thank him. He's got a big call Saturday night at Lincoln Financial. Let me start it here with you, Merrill. How important do you think that bye was for the Eagles getting ready for this game Saturday night against the Giants?
I think it's important at this time of the year, Dan, for every team. Every team that gets – there's only two teams, one in the NFC and one in the AFC. But for those teams that get the bye, it's always important. In fact, if you could take all the teams in the tournament, a bye would have benefited every one of them, because after 17 football games, there have got to be guys who have bruises and sprains and pulls and whatnot to heal. So I think it's important, especially in the case where your quarterback was coming off of an injury. But I think he's in pretty good shape. And I actually think he was in pretty good shape a couple of weeks ago, but they were very careful in limiting his playbook.
Merrill, I said this a couple minutes ago to open the show here. I think we're going to get a really good sense on where he is health-wise if the playbook is opened. And what I mean by that is the last regular season game, they obviously didn't want him running. They wanted him throwing it away. They didn't want him taking chances on running. He ran a few times to get out of some harm's way. But do you think if we're going to know immediately if the playbook's open and we see him on third down taking off again to break perimeter down?
I think,
or if they're a little more conservative in how they play him, we'll know right away if that playbook is open.
I think it'll be open. If you look at this season, you know what was missing in that last game? You talk about the fact that the Eagles were not up to their usual productivity out of the red zone. And the play that was missing that worked so often during the season was the quarterback draw. I mean, he had mastered it, where he takes one step back and then sachets usually untouched up the middle. And he didn't use that once. He really didn't run up the middle. A couple of the times he rolled out, and when he didn't find a receiver, he ran down the sideline and then stepped out at the perfect time. But basically, he stayed out of the traffic areas. And I think this time he'll have the whole field at his disposal.
Do you think, Merrill, that the Eagles had been pulling back a little bit on Miles Sanders the last couple games of the year? Because I was talking to Mike Missinelli the other day. He thought he was a little banged up in his knee and thought that there was a little slight injury that he had. And that's kind of one of the reasons why the Eagles maybe didn't utilize him more and give him more carries. You think that's why we saw him sporadically in the play calling?
I do. I really do. And it's no secret. They weren't, because every day you'd look and you'd say, when you look at the report from practice, it would say limited participant Miles Sanders and then knee. So he obviously was not 100%. He didn't have an injury that needed any kind of repair, just a little rest and a chance to heal. So I think that's an accurate statement to think that they did not feature him the way they have in the past because he was not 100%. But I think he's 100% now.
Merrill, I'll tell you the obvious sign of coaching is in New York. And I made a comparison. I think this Giant team looks kind of like the 2021 Eagles, prior to them, where they ended up getting big-time wide receivers and adding some more components on the defensive side. The first game, I think that's more the game. And that was week 14, so it's kind of close to where we are today. But have you been surprised on how well Daniel Jones is taking Brian Dable and how well that Giant team looked? I mean, they look spectacular against Minnesota. This could be a game on Saturday night.
I think it will be. I think a lot of fans and some members of the media expect this to be a rout, because you look at the comparative records. Here are the Eagles 14-3 and the Giants were 9-7-1. But this is not the same Giants team. I mean, a couple of weeks, the Eagles, that's no barometer of all the game against the backups. But go back to December the 11th, and the Eagles beat them up pretty badly. But that doesn't mean anything to me. This is several weeks later, and I think the Giants continue to get better. And as far as Daniel Jones is concerned, Dan, I liked him from the time I watched him at Duke. I watch a lot of college football, and I thought he was special. And I think the biggest problems he had in the first couple of years were injuries and a tendency to turn over the ball via interception or fumble. But this Giants coaching staff has emphasized improvement in both of those areas. And I think he's a real good quarterback. And I agree with you. I thought he's coming off of an absolutely terrific game against the Vikings. And I think that if I were to rate the quarterbacks going into next season, based on what I'm seeing now, he's a top 10 quarterback.
That's a great statement. And I'm telling you, he's knocking all kinds of barriers down. And just think of this too, Merrill. I mean, we have a conversation in our offseason when it comes to Jalen Hurts, but can you imagine going back and what the fan base must be thinking about the Giants going like this? And they passed on the 5th-year option on Daniel Jones. That means now if you franchise tag him, it's expected to be $45.3 million. And you talk about and then letting Bradbury go. I mean, for all the things the Giants have done right, you let Bradbury go and you didn't pick up the 5th-year option on Daniel Jones. I think that's going to be a pretty interesting offseason for what the Giants are going to have to go through. But let's get back over with the Eagles here. Do you think it's more important to get Dallas Goedert going or Miles Sanders going in this game against the Giants on Saturday night?
I think Dallas Goedert. I mean, I think it's important with Miles Sanders too. But don't forget, with Miles Sanders, there's another little guy who comes in there, wears number 35, and runs low to the ground, and they can't find him behind the line of scrimmage.
You like him, Merrill.
I love him. I love Boston Scott. Boston Scott is a heck of a back. He played a great game against the Giants backup a few weeks ago. I call him the Giant Killer. Two guys I call the Giant Killer. One is Boston Scott, and the other is Jake Elliott, whose introduction to the Giants in 2017 was a 61-yard game-winning field goal. And he has been belting the Giants ever since, kicking them in the teeth. So those two guys specialize in beating the Giants. But Boston Scott is awfully good. Now, I'm not belittling Miles Sanders. He's your bread and butter back, or as they call them sometimes, your bell cow back. But I think he's had an outstanding season. Miles really has. I mean, you're talking about Miles Sanders, who this year rushed for 11 touchdowns, averaged almost 5 yards a carry, and was just under 1,300 yards for the season. So you're talking about a great back. All I'm saying is they're deep there, and their third down back, Kenneth Gainwell, is in chopped liver also.
He kind of reminds me of the old Dave Meggett that the Giants had. Boston Scott, pass out of the backfield, a dual back where you could plug him in anywhere. He's not afraid inside the tackles to run also. He runs off tackle. He's pretty versatile.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%.
The importance of getting Lane back, no matter what the percentage is. And again, too, Merrill, not to throw shade on Lamar Jackson for not playing at 100%, and not even showing up and being on the sideline with his teammates in that game last weekend. I have a problem with stuff like that. But getting Lane back and having him in the huddle, in your opinion, means what?
Well, it means a lot. I'm not aware of the inside part of the Lamar Jackson situation. Did they want him on the sideline or did they not want him on the sideline? And as far as his injury was concerned, could he have not played with it? If it were an injury where he could have furthered the damage already, maybe they were doing the wise thing. I can't answer that. But I can talk about Lane Johnson. He is your basic warrior. He's your gladiator. He'd go down. He'd come out on one leg if he had to. That's Lane Johnson. He wants to be there for the playoffs. He defines the word toughness and grit. He's so tough. Now, my concern is not can Lane Johnson start, because he can start and he can suck up the pain and he'll take whatever they'll give him to minimize the effect. My question is, can he last? And that's what you have to watch out for. Can this injury be exacerbated because he is so tough to the point where by halftime or the third quarter, he really can't keep going? And it would be better off to bring in Jack Driscoll. So I don't know. The thing we'll keep an eye on is how it affects Lane Johnson once he gets going and what his endurance level is going to be with the injury. But there's no question about his desire and his drive and his dedication to his team and teammates and his toughness.
Two last questions for you here, Merrill. Merrill, you've been around the team going all the way back to the Vermeil days.
So 100.
Tell me, prior to that too, right? Prior to that too.
Okay.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Why has it been such an emphasis for Jeffrey Lurie and who's ever been the GM, and it's Joe Banner or it's been Howie, to have such great offensive linemen? And I played against those 80 Eagle teams. And look, I love Dave Remington. He's a dear friend of mine. I loved Ron Heller. He was a former teammate of mine with the Buccaneers. I mean, all those guys were fine ball players. But there was never – I mean, you got two Hall of Fame guys. A guy who played last night, who's playing for the Cowboys, played a ton of years also. And why has that been an emphasis with Howie and Joe Banner and Jeffrey Lurie to make sure that that position and that grouping has always had the best guys in the league?
Because of the old adage. I hate to throw out a cliche, but you've heard it a lot, and it's the truth. This game is won in the trenches. And you've got to be able to run the ball and you've got to be able to stop the ball. And those are both products of the offensive and defensive lines. That's the very basic part. But you know what? And I give Jeffrey a lot of credit. He's a fabulous owner and he lets his people do their jobs. And Howie's done a magnificent job. Executive of the Year in 2017, probably will be again this year. But here's the interesting thing. Go back to that Dick Vermeil team when I first stepped behind the play-by-play microphone, and he had a great offensive line too. He had the center was Guy Morris, who went on to become the head coach at the University of Kentucky and sadly passed away this year. The guards were Woody Peoples and a guy by the name of Petey Perot, who was tough as nails, and both tackles were Eagles, now in the Eagles Hall of Fame, and they were great all pros. They made it to the Pro Bowl. Stan Walters, who was my broadcast partner for 14 years.
Wow.
And Jerry Sizemore. Those were number one draft choice out of Texas. This was a very talented offensive line. They were terrific. And then on defense, they had some great players too. I mean, this was prior to the Reggie White era under Buddy, but they had people on that line. Claude Humphrey, who is
Hall of Famer,
Claude Humphrey, great one. They had Carl Hairston, another very talented defensive end. Dick used to call him Hurricane Hairston.
Didn't he end up in San Francisco too? Didn't he go to I thought he ended up like after Philly. I thought he went to like the 49ers.
Cardinals.
Cardinals.
I think he went to Arizona. They had a nose tackle by the name of Charlie Johnson, who recently...
Big Hands Johnson.
Charlie Johnson, very, very tough. Very, very tough. I mean, they had some people, too, on both the offensive and the defensive lines. And they have the linebackers. They have Bill Berge.
Love him.
Bill Berge should be in the Hall of Fame.
He is one of my favorite childhood players of all time. And it's funny you mentioned him. It's funny we're even here that I told people, someone goes, Sills, I know you wear a Jalen Hurts jersey underneath. I go, no, it would be more of a Bill Berge jersey. I'm more of that era kind of guy because I love that team, man. I love the fact that if I'm not mistaken, I thought he was a coach at Duke for a little bit too. I thought he did some work at Duke.
Who?
Bill Berge.
No, you know who you're confusing him with?
Or Carolina.
No, you're confusing him with John Bunting.
John Bunting, that's right.
Was
John Bunting was good.
And he became the head coach at his alma mater, North Carolina.
That's right.
And I think he still does some games
Yeah.
in the EC network, but he was the head coach at his alma mater, University of North Carolina. That's John Bunting. It was John Bunting on one side, Bubba in the middle. That was Bill Berge, and on the other side was Frank LeMaster. And then they had some other people who came in, but this was a ferocious defense. It really was.
Hey, Merrill, how much is the relationship with you and the players changed? I mean, look at what you're talking about. You're talking about Berge, then you're talking about Seth Joyner, now you're talking about TJ Edwards. What has changed all these years for you, or has anything changed when it comes to your relationships with these guys?
Okay, the only difference is at that point in time, they were contemporaries. I mean, we were all around the same age. So the players and the wives would come over to our house, and Cindy would make dinner, and we'd be invited to their family affairs. And our pilot, his name was Bob McGraw, had a farm. And the day after the season began, that Monday, he'd have a big picnic at the farm, and all the players and their families, and Cindy and I would go out there. So there was that social aspect. Now the difference is that, number one, we're not allowed, and I don't think anybody is I don't think this is different from team to team. You get to see the warm-ups at practice, and then they say, all right, media is off the field. So we're not at practice for the full session.
I think that's a Patriots thing, Merrill.
Well, maybe they started it, but it's the other thing is we're allowed in the locker room. We weren't for the past 2 years for the obvious pandemic reason, but we're allowed in the locker room. And also I do a show every Tuesday night from there's a restaurant chain here, Chickies and Pete's, and owned by Pete Shiraki, who's now got them in quite a few NFL cities. But I do a show tonight from 6 to 7, and I'll have players who want to come on the show, and they'll be my guest. So I get to know them because I sit there and I chat with them for an hour, and we become very friendly. So the only difference in the relationship now is that when they used to come to our homes because we were about the same age, now I play golf with some of them. Who Jake Elliott is a great golfer. He's a scratch handicap, and Aaron Sipp is the punter. He can hit the long ball, and a lot of them. And I've gotten to be very friendly with Boston Scott. He's just the nicest, friendliest guy you'd ever want to meet. And I know Jalen Hurts. He's a very quiet guy, man of a few words, but he's a classy individual. He's so dedicated to his profession. And I'm going to make a statement to you. People always say to me, after all these years, and this is my 46th, who is your favorite Eagle? And I can't say that because I've met so many great guys. I mean, I've worked for the last 25 years in the booth with 6-time All-Pro Mike Quick, and there's nobody better. And Harold Carmichael. Harold often comes up and hangs out in the back of our booth during the game while Mike and I are broadcasting. So we're all good friends. But I will tell you one thing. I have never in my life, in any walk of life, connected with broadcasting or connected with just daily life, met a nicer human being than Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham, if you bump into Brandon Graham in the hall, your days just got better. If that big guy, number 55, comes over, he'll see you. He'll come over and give you a hug. You talk for a few minutes. Your day just got better because that's how he affects everybody. He brings happiness to everybody he meets, and he's involved in all the charities. He's the Eagles nominee for Walter Payton Man of the Year. You'll never meet a nicer human being in your life than BG.
You know what's funny, Merrill? You're kind of mentioning, and I was very close to Jerome, and I got to be very good friends with Reggie and his wife. That sounds like how Reggie, it sounds like he's got a little Reggie White in him, because if you were ever around Reggie White, you're going to get a sermon first. And then secondly, he's one of the most soft-spoken people you've ever met in your life and one of the most destructive human beings you've ever seen on a football field. And that kind of reminds me a little bit. So he's got a little bit of Reggie White in him.
Did I ever tell you my
No, please.
My Jerome Brown story?
No.
So I did the Monday night show then from a now defunct restaurant called the Broadway Restaurant and Deli at the Bellevue Hotel. And one week I had asked Jerome to come down, and the player could order dinner there or take something home. So we finished the show, and it's a Monday night, and Jerome goes over, he did the show, and he goes over to the counter. He says, I'll have 3 corned beef, 2 roast beef sandwiches, and a tuna salad. So I said, oh, you're having some friends over? He said, no, this is for me. This is Monday night snack for Monday Night Football. That Jerome was hysterical.
Hey, Merrill, one quick story here, too. So Buddy comes down to see, and believe it or not, him and Jimmy, and I've posted this picture of me, Jerome, and Buddy Ryan. And he came down to the University of Miami practice. Him and Jimmy Johnson were friends then. And this was his first year in '86.
Well, they both on the state.
Oh, he came down and he was talking about the 46, but yet he was going to revamp the 46 in Philly because he had a whole bunch of new players. So anyway, so he goes, I'm going to take you 2 guys out to lunch. So I go with it's me, Jimmy Johnson, Buddy Ryan, and Jerome, and Norman Brayman. Norman Brayman down in South Florida because, he owns the Cadillac dealership and he owned the Eagles at the time. Sure. We all knew Jerome was going to the Eagles. Norman Brayman looks over at him. He goes, we're going to draft you. And Buddy Ryan goes, if you're there, we're going to draft you. And we knew in '86, when he was the 9th player taken, that if Jerome was on the board, sure enough, man, Norman Brayman comes over to the complex and tells me, he goes, did I not tell you we were going to draft Jerome Brown? We knew right then and there. And when Buddy goes, Buddy knew in '86, his senior year, he was taking Jerome Brown.
Yeah, I believe that. The thing about Reggie and Jerome were great friends, but Reggie was the man of the cloth, the minister of defense, and Jerome's mouth and vocabulary was not fit for it was not PG. And every time Reggie would get mad at Jerome for using bad language, when Jerome turned his back, Reggie would take Jerome's street pants out of the locker and tie them in knots around the locker post, and Jerome couldn't get his pants off. He'd be struggling with the knots while cursing out Reggie. But they were a show unto themselves.
Do you agree, Merrill, that football team was maybe the most charismatic football team in Eagle history?
Counting the head coach?
Including the head coach. Okay, fair enough.
Oh, my goodness. You know what? I'll give you one quick, since we're on, I'll give you one quick Buddy Ryan story. There was an offensive lineman named Kenny Reeves, and one summer he had appendicitis and missed training camp. And the next summer he had a high ankle sprain and missed part of training camp. So the day that Kenny Reeves was cleared to play and go back to camp, Buddy traded him. So, and I had a great relationship with Buddy. And I went over to Buddy and said, why did you trade Kenny Reeves? He's a good player. Buddy said, he's always injured. I said, wait a minute, Buddy, appendicitis and a high ankle sprain are unrelated. And Buddy said, let me tell you something. If a cow has a calf and that calf goes across the barbed wire fence and gets struck dead by a 12-wheeler, and that cow has another calf, and that calf gets struck dead by lightning some stormy night, you shoot the blankety-blank cow.
We are going to leave it on that, Merrill. Have a great call on Hey, Merrill, you've covered them all, dude.
I have, Dan.
You've covered them all. Have a great call, Merrill.
Thank you.
You bet. Our legendary friend, Merrill Reese, man. That was a great one, man. That was absolutely fantastic. Going down that line like that. Man, that football team was so charismatic, man. That old school Eagles team, man. Many of those guys. Keith Byers, we've